Blockchain Show is a podcast that demystifies cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technology.
Hello, welcome back. You're listening to The Blockchain Show. This is episode number 163. I'm here today with Jesse Uzzelle. Jesse, how are you doing?
Doing pretty well, Ethan. Hanging in there during this whole stay-at-home coronavirus situation we're all experiencing.
Yeah, unprecedented times. This is we're about 4 or 5 episodes into this whole deal. Luckily, I've been doing the podcast over the internet, so it hasn't impacted us too much. But this might be a good episode to kind of tie in globally, because we're going to be talking about climate futures, which I know that you're a part of. You know, the CEO and founder of Climate Futures, the organization behind 1PLANET.
One Planet Marketplace. You know, play on the concept that we haven't got an alternative planet yet. Maybe in the future, but we'll see. So far, this is the only one we've got. We got to take care of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe before we kind of jump into specifically what you're working on, could you just tell us maybe a little bit about yourself, how you got to be involved with Climate Futures and maybe even this blockchain in general?
I guess the short version of my background is that I grew up in Florida, and then I studied actually at the American University for my undergrad and Texas A&M. So I'm an Aggie. That means anything to people. It means something to other Aggies anyway. But then I wound up doing my master's in Sweden in environmental engineering and sustainable development in the 90s. And finished just about the time that the Kyoto Protocol was agreed, and started working for a company in Norway called DNV that does verification and certification, and started working with the first greenhouse gas certification projects around the world, connected to the Kyoto Protocol and connected to the carbon footprint of different companies. So British Petroleum being one of the first that we did the global verification for. And in those days, it was kind of the formative years of what we call the carbon markets, putting a price on CO2 and trading it like you would another, a commodity. So this kind of really went on until about 2005, when it really took off. And those days in the carbon market were very exciting. I started Climate Futures back then to develop portfolios of projects that would reduce carbon emissions that cause climate change. And we would use carbon financing, the sale of these carbon credits, to finance and fund the projects. So I guess I got started, just at the right time in carbon markets to be a part of that whole development and understand a little bit how it developed as well, the systems behind it that underpinned them. So I'm kind of fortunate there. And then I moved back to the United States. And, I felt in a way I was going back in time when it comes to environmental policies in some degrees, particularly here in Florida compared to, say, California. A series of events kind of pushed me into this feeling a need to start more advocacy toward climate policy here. Trump got elected. That was one part, because he started dismantling things that the Obama administration had done, wanted to pull us out of the Paris Agreement. And we were hit by a series of hurricanes, mega storms that caused myself and others to evacuate, several years in a row, Irma, Harvey, et cetera. So we were seeing all these climate impacts. And when I started this whole thing 20 years ago, I thought, okay, we're going to solve this. I mean, this is not something we cannot solve as a civilization. And strangely enough, we didn't, 2 decades, and we didn't do enough. So I kind of started thinking out of the box, like, how do we engage people? How do we take what we have that exists today that we know works, and how do we improve on it? And that led me into the blockchain technology and looking at how we could use that. And so I think, that's the reason blockchain makes so much sense when it comes to the problem of climate change is really at the heart of it. We're dealing with not only transformational change, but we're dealing with this carbon budget. when I say transformation or change in our economy, but we're dealing with a carbon budget that the Earth has, and that's what science is telling us, and that's what scientists are telling us we have to keep track of and eventually reduce our emissions. So all of the global agreements underpinning climate action, like Kyoto, Paris Agreement, at their heart, they're a big carbon accounting system and platform. And so blockchain makes a lot of sense when you think of it like that, when you think of how to use it for tackling climate change.
Absolutely. And I'm very curious to hear how you're going about that with some of the things you're working on. But maybe before we get into some of the specifics, would you mind telling me, how did the company come to begin, and maybe tell us a little bit about how your team gathered?
In Europe in those days, they were getting ready to start the largest carbon market at the time in the European Union. That's when I decided to do something more entrepreneurial and work on projects that could then participate in this new development. And I wound up working actually, for trading desks doing origination and project development. And so that was when we started, Climate Futures. So I have another co-founder who's from China originally, and we worked together before we founded Climate Futures. And we wound up actually working quite a bit in China. It was a very active country for global carbon markets because of all the investment in infrastructure there. You also have to understand in 2001, George Bush Jr. pulled us out of the Kyoto Protocol, us meaning the United States. So suddenly the United States wasn't able to play in this space. I mean, companies could participate, but you couldn't do projects in the United States that would be part of the Kyoto Protocol. So I wound up working on projects all over the world, working with governments and large companies like, we were working with Morgan Stanley and later with Curia, also doing work for the Norwegian government. So also Swedish governments, et cetera. So there's, the company itself has been more of a boutique consultancy and advisory services company. So, our foray into software development is something relatively new, compared to what we've been doing since 2005. But it builds on all of our experience working with, all types of different climate projects that are out there, and trying to encapsulate, that experience and put it into what is 1Planet, in terms of the app or the DApp, and how we use the crypto tokens and these things. So, one of the concepts behind 1Planet that's really important is it's not just about buying and selling carbon credits, a tokenized form of those. It's actually about using them. So we're trying to increase the use cases for carbon credits. And, that's what I think is really interesting. Whereas other projects that have been announced that haven't really done much, to my knowledge, they don't seem to really focus on the use cases. So that's where I think we differentiate ourselves.
It's interesting when you talk about the actual use cases. Definitely would like to learn more about, how you're particularly, using some of these elements like tokenization, et cetera. But before we get into the blockchain specifics, would you mind telling us a little bit more about what's currently being done to help kind of stem climate change? Maybe some of the problems with the current situation. I know that you mentioned previous presidents that, that happen to be Republicans, removing the country, the United States, from some of these international, I don't know if you'd call them treaties, but like Kyoto and the Paris Accords. Some people think it's because there's like a denial of science, but I suspect it has more to do with, energy companies, financial interests, and maybe politicizing it into a way that might maybe fool the people into thinking there's no problem. I'm not really sure the specifics. I've got theories, but yeah, sorry to ramble on, but maybe you could just tell us a little bit about, expand upon the problems and what's being done and how that can be improved upon.
I think what's important is that people's opinions have shifted now, 20 years on from Kyoto, 22 actually. So, when I first started, people, and I would come home, particularly to the United States, people wouldn't have a clue what I was working with. They thought I was a meteorologist or something. So that was kind of the joke. I was Jesse the weatherman among some of my friends. But today, That's not the case. People understand that climate change is real. Surveys done by, for example, Yale University show that 70% of Americans believe climate change is a real and present, danger. But I think where everything diverges is what can you do about it? So that's the issue that we're trying to tackle with One Planet is, what can I as an individual do about it? What kind of action can I take that's verifiable and has environmental integrity? If I'm a small and medium-sized business, it's great that Amazon and Microsoft are now taking pledges and want to do something. But if I don't have that, that capacity in-house, I don't have their resources, what can my company do? That's where I think, One Planet can actually have a real role to play as well. So the technology and the system is designed to be scalable, but it works, very well for smaller organizations. So, so that's getting back to your question though, on the whole climate action has been, and we're witnessing it now again with coronavirus. It's been a history of getting some momentum and then other events sort of taking over and having a more immediate need, and the response from governments have kind of been sidetracked. So, for example, 9/11, September 11th, and the attack, and suddenly terrorism in 2001 was the main priority for the United States and many countries. So that was another, reason why climate change was put on the sidelines, at least here in the United States, and there wasn't enough done to tackle the problem and to change our infrastructure. And I think that's part of the problem too, is that the issue of climate change, it's insidious, but it's also directly connected to how we've built our economy. We live in a very carbon intensive economy. Everything depends on fossil fuels. So we have to kind of decarbonize our economy and create this, low carbon economy, as people like to call it. And so, that has been the push. And one of the instruments that is really effective, I think, at giving the right signals to companies, and particularly if you're talking about a market-based economy, is putting a price on carbon. So there's different ways to do that, but the two that are most, talked about are carbon markets, so a market-based system, or a carbon tax. And there's proponents for both, but in my experience, having worked with business, the initial start is that business doesn't want anything. Some businesses don't anyway. And then the more enlightened ones want something, but they don't want a tax. And so at the end of the day, you wind up with something like a carbon market, which is a flexible market-based system where you cap emissions over a region and you give companies some flexibility to decide what's best for themselves and how they price carbon. But the most important thing is it creates a metric that companies can understand and relate to. You're creating an asset, you're creating a cost, you're creating exposure to the issue that suddenly they have systems in place already to deal, to help manage the problem. So you put it in terms that they can work with. Whereas if you just talk about climate change as a problem, it gets very diffuse for people. So you have to bring it home and talk about things like projects that you can do on the ground, ways to reduce emissions, ways to finance those projects. So I think, what I've noticed also, having worked on this for 2 decades, is that younger people, they get it. And a lot of them have anxiety about climate change because it's something that's happening way up in the atmosphere, and it's hard for people to bring it home to themselves. What can I do in my daily life to help things? How am I, I had someone tell me, well, my parents immigrated to Miami from Cuba. Now I think I have to actually immigrate somewhere else. I could become a climate refugee as sea level rise happens here in Miami. And, she was 20 and she has actually a lot of anxiety about it, which kind of surprised me. But then when I realized, if you don't know, if you're not like me and you don't work in this field, you don't have any way to engage. So again, what we try to do with One Planet is give people a way to engage on it, not just sit and worry about it, but bring it home in a way that they can engage in their daily life. So that's kind of the concept.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're working on. I mean, I'm someone that has really benefited a lot from my time in nature, whether it's through backpacking or just going to the beach. It's such a beautiful planet we live on, and I think it's a good idea just to take care of the planet no matter what someone believes. Sometimes when I drive by south of LA, there's, they have some refineries and they're just pumping massive amounts. It's got to be CO2 into the air. You can just see it amongst other things. And it's like, how is that still happening? This is just madness. You're just blanketing the sky. I can definitely relate to some of the anxiety and, even to some of the feelings of helplessness because, a lot of times these are giant, often global corporations that have a lot of power. And when I saw that there was a company like yours utilizing the blockchain to have an impact, I was excited. So I'm wondering if you could just maybe tell us a little bit more about 1PLANET, how it differs from your company, and a little bit about the Ethereum Hyperledger system, if you would.
Well, I think like a lot of good projects, the concept has kind of evolved over time since we started this. And we started working on this back in late 97 and really started doing a lot of the software development in 98. It's when I say evolve, originally, I guess the starting point was, okay, we have these carbon credits that are, eco commodities. They exist only really digitally. And you have now this new technology that can create a crypto token. For myself, I have a hard time wrapping my head around how do you price a crypto token and value it. I know there's a lot of theories on that, so I'm not going to go into that other than I can say, well, for me, if I can attach something that has another value to the crypto token, then it makes more sense. It's easier for me to put value on it. So for me, putting together a digital eco commodity that, operates in fragmented markets that are at times illiquid and a crypto token that's also digital made, perfect sense. So you wind up with kind of a type of stable coin, but it's denominated in CO2 and not, dollars. More similar, I guess, to like the gold-backed Tether token, I guess. So it's, asset-backed in a sense. It represents a carbon credit. So it has all the same utility as a carbon credit, but you can do more with it. And it's easier to access because to access carbon credits, you have to have specialized accounts and registries around the world. It's not an easy thing for you to transfer and to use to send to other people, especially, individuals and smaller companies. So with a crypto token, anyone with a phone and internet can access it, and get a digital wallet. So increasing access is one thing, but then the other element that came into the whole 1PLANET marketplace was trying to, combine people and companies and climate solutions to create this positive economy for climate action. That's really where it's grown. So, as we have more partners that come on board and want to use the system, it becomes a B to B to C type of system in that sense. So what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example. We have one partner called Pildora, and they've created a marketplace for sustainable fashion. So for emerging designers all over the world, they're offering their products on their website. So you can go to pildora.com and check it out. Or you can go to our website and find the link. But nevertheless, what they wanted to offer was carbon neutral or climate friendly shipping for their products because it fit very well, their brand and what they were trying to do. And they wanted to use 1PLANET for that. So our system is really developed for e-commerce. So we have the app that people can use, but we also have an API that e-commerce software can communicate with. And so there's different ways for companies and partners to connect to the system. And what that does is it creates, again, this sort of, ecosystem of users for the platform. And what we want to do, where we want to head with this is what I find is that there are a lot of companies that want to take climate action. And what I mean by that, mainstream companies, not necessarily crypto companies. And they're more skeptical about using crypto tokens for payments and things. I mean, I'm not saying some want to, some don't. Some are kind of curious, call them crypto curious. And what I find is that our system, it's designed using this dual blockchain technology so that if they want to use crypto tokens and take payments in crypto, then our system plugs into it through the Ethereum side. If they don't want to do that, we can connect them through the Hyperledger side, and that's where the carbon assets are, and basically run transactions very quickly. That's the other benefit of using Hyperledger is the speed. Those transactions are aggregated by the system and then written on the Ethereum side, in chunks, if you will, which also reduces the cost, for the gas fees and things. So the system was designed for real world applications. For companies that some companies don't want all of the data to be public. So we have to use the permission side of Hyperledger for that. Some don't, but all the transactions wind up getting written on the public Ethereum side, eventually. And then the Ethereum side gives us the crypto token capability that you won't get with Hyperledger. So that's why we're using this dual blockchain system. And it gives us, more than anything, it gives us a lot of flexibility for how our partners connect to the system.
And you mentioned that some companies were, curious about crypto, but not necessarily sure that they want to use it. Am I understanding this correctly, that they can still participate?
Sometimes when we're talking to business partners, what they want is the carbon offsetting ability. They want the ability to reduce CO2 emissions, and they like that. They want that. But they'll come around and say, but, we've also been really looking into, taking payments with Bitcoin and using other crypto, tokens and things. And so this is really interesting. Can you tell us more about that? And how would that work? Could we, take 1Planet tokens in the future? So it opens the door, if you will, for them to start adopting more blockchain technology. So I see our platform also has some benefits, I guess, to the broader community in that sense. We have a real utility token. I mean, it's a token that actually has a use beyond just, payments and trading. You use the token that's to offset carbon emissions. So that is the use case of the product of the crypto token. And in order to do that, you need to take receipt of it. And so they have to have then on their side a crypto wallet. So it depends on the user. So we're able to customize, I guess you could say, the interaction with the system. So, but again, what I find is that it's a nice, for the companies that are not looking into crypto, or they're still looking into it, it's a nice segue into kind of, now we can start, implementing crypto payments along with taking 1Planet tokens and offering carbon offsetting to our clients. So it's kind of another way for them to kind of get engaged in blockchain technology.
Yeah, that's great. You're doing a huge service on two fronts there. Now, I wanted to just go back a little bit and have you explain to me how exactly the carbon offset works, because I understand that carbon credits can be purchased in the form of ERC20 tokens, earned and gifted. And I know that there's an actual utility to offset carbon emissions, but how would that work?
Yeah, I think you have to go back to the actual carbon credit. And often people use carbon credit and carbon offset interchangeably, but really offset is the verb. It's like, I'm going to use the carbon credit to offset my carbon footprint. And then everyone says, just, okay, I want to buy carbon offsets, or I'm using carbon offsets. So the two get used very much interchangeably. But the use case for carbon, so when you're trading a carbon credit, like let's say I'm selling it, you're buying it, you're not reducing emissions. Okay, it was generated per se. You're just moving, the asset around. But when you're using the asset to reduce your own carbon footprint or to offset your emissions, you're balancing your carbon footprint. So, this is, I would say, a financial, in a way, it's a carbon accounting. It's a carbon accounting methodology where you're looking at climate doesn't care where the CO2 emissions are emitted or reduced because it all goes up and mixes in the atmosphere. So that allows us, human beings to create this system of basically looking at where we're going to remove carbon and where we're going to emit carbon and try to balance it out, or ideally go beyond, our emissions and reduce more. So, an easy example conceptually would be like a rainforest conservation project, or you're actually doing some land use change where you're taking degraded farmland and you're growing some forest or some even crops there. So, but essentially what you're doing is you're sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere using, nature in this case, and that will then reduce CO2, and then you're financing that through the sale of the carbon offsets. So this is where the carbon finance comes in. So these projects cost money; they're not being done necessarily because altruism. So the way you finance that is you do that through the sale of the carbon offsets, and that allows, let's say, a person or a company that doesn't have the option to reduce at home, a way to take action and still help the global climate. So it's a carbon finance mechanism, but it's also a way of accounting for your own carbon footprint. Now, bringing it back home to you and me, what does that mean? And what I find is that people, organizations are filled with people. And what I've found working with businesses and other organizations is once they understand their carbon footprint, okay, that's the very first step. So it's like saying, I admit I'm an alcoholic. Okay, I have a problem. So, but I know now the size of my problem, right? It's 1,000 tons a month or whatever it turns out to be. So, their initial goal is to, go carbon neutral or to, understand their carbon footprint. And then the next thing they're going to do is they're going to put a price on that by saying, okay, I've admitted that I basically use the atmosphere for free, and now I'm going to pay something for that. And that's when they're purchasing the carbon credits, and then they're going to use those to offset their carbon footprint. But I tell you what, every one of them next time wants to pay less. And so what they're going to do is they're going to look at ways to reduce their emissions, ways to change their systems and their protocols. Again, coming back to the individual, it's the same process. Most people don't know what their carbon footprint is. So what we did was we developed these carbon calculators for people to easily estimate it depending on how much data they have and how much time they have to look into it. And then they have the option, if they want, to offset their, let's say, annual carbon footprint or their plane flight or their cruise that they took to the Caribbean, or even that shipping from some online store. But the whole idea is, again, getting people in this mindset of understanding where their carbon footprint is produced and what contributes to it, and giving them also access to alternative service providers and alternative product providers that want to provide more sustainable, less carbon intensive products. And some of them want to do that through, connecting to 1Planet and using it to reduce the emissions from the logistics and supply chain. So basically what we give people as well through the platform is a way to find these more sustainable alternatives to live a more sustainable lifestyle. So it's kind of it's an iterative process. It's not just a one-time thing.
Yeah, that's very awesome, man. Well, thanks for explaining that, because I definitely understand a lot more now. Where I'm curious is if someone on an individual level, like, for instance, me, I've been involved with some of these nonprofit organizations to help rebuild habitats for different wildlife that have been impacted by urbanization. And, I do a lot of just cleaning up trash and, helping to plant plants for certain insects to have a habitat, that sort of thing. But I'm pretty low level, like a lot of grunt work kind of stuff. But I do get to interact with some of the folks that apply for grants from the government, and it's a process, and they have to compete with everyone else in the country to get their grant, and sometimes they have to put projects on hold. So I really appreciate, how this marketplace that you're working on can facilitate change more efficiently and a lot quicker. But just to get back to my question, if say I wanted to put together a project that would pull carbon from the air, would I be able to like walk me through the process of how to sell?
Yeah,
And
I think it's a great question, and I'll give you an example of something that we're doing with one of our partners, Ultra Music Festival. So this is a very recent example, and okay, so you understand that carbon credits and carbon offsets, they're created through a process that actually has a lot of verification, transparency, if you know where to look for it. And it takes some time. So not every project can go through and get approved to actually generate carbon offsets. So my background actually was in designing the systems for that. So that's why we have a real heavy emphasis on verification and transparency in our design. But essentially, it's a 1 to 2 year process to actually generate a carbon credit from a project. So we have to work with existing projects, but what we want to do is support new projects. And so what we're doing with our platform is we're combining the two, which is kind of exciting. So we can take, we can allow our users to use carbon offsets from existing projects to also support new projects that they want to do. And in the case of Ultra Music Festival, what we had done is we had designed a campaign, and this was all going to happen in March and got canceled because of coronavirus, but we had designed a campaign for their attendees to engage on the issue of climate change and offset their travel carbon footprint because for a music festival of like 60,000 people, about 80% or 90% of the emissions are really caused by the attendees, not by the event itself. So when they all travel to the event. And so we had everything set up using 1PLANET for that. And we were going to support a project in the Amazon rainforest that conserved a region there. And also we were going to use part of that funding to also fund tree planting here in Miami. So what we've done, one of the things that we're doing with our system is we can absolutely bring in new projects and connect them with existing ones. So we're, the system, depending on how you look at it, and it has different, it's depending on your perspective, it does different things. So one thing it does is it's a better way to crowd fund and crowd finance climate projects. And so that is exactly what we build it for. It's like something like what you're suggesting is you've got this great project and you need to get access to some funding. And basically we take it to our community and okay, if they like the project, then why not? So it's kind of a crypto, Kickstarter, if you will. I mean, we of course have to vet the projects a little bit ourselves, but that's something that's what we have experience in doing. So we work with different projects at different stages. But what's underpinning everything is that there are projects that create the carbon offset. So every token is when you're using the tokens and so forth, you have this eco commodity behind it that makes all of the carbon accounting correct. But in terms of the financial flows and things, what we want to do is we want to supercharge carbon markets to basically incentivize new projects here in America and elsewhere around the world.
Yeah, well, that's great, man.
So I guess on the evangelistic side, that's what I love about the crypto community is people want change, they want to do things. So I get really excited when I'm around people in this crypto and blockchain space, because a lot of them they want change and they see blockchain is one way of producing that change. And I think that's a new demographic that we can engage to bring into the issue of climate change and make a difference. I think people can really make a difference using our technology.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you. And we're seeing maybe a different, maybe a difference in self-reflection, definitely globally during this, COVID-19 pandemic, I guess you could, I mean, it certainly is. I don't know if you've seen the images of the canals in Venice being clear.
Yeah, we let the world catch its breath a little bit, hopefully. That's what we're all hoping for.
Right.
But, it's interesting. I mean, we started on this topic earlier, and I realized I left a lot out, so I just wanted to bring it back. So 20 years plus, we've been working, the world doesn't know about climate change. We haven't gotten there yet. And part of the reason is every time we get some momentum going globally, something comes around and distracts us and takes our attention away from climate change. And let's face it, climate change is kind of this boogeyman for a lot of people, and a bigger one shows up. So I mentioned, we had the terrorism was the big boogeyman in 2001, and then we got a lot of momentum going. Kyoto started in earnest, and so there was a lot of activity happening in carbon markets and in climate finance and climate projects, because that's ultimately what you're trying to do. You're trying to create these projects that generate clean electricity and conserve rainforests and these things. Everything else before that is just a way to try to finance those. And what I was trying to say is that then we had the finance crisis. So that showed up in 2008, 2009, depending on where you want to put it. And basically that derailed things as well. Then we finally got out of the finance crisis and the Paris Agreement. So then the other hurdle was that Kyoto had ended and we didn't have a follow-up treaty because all the governments in the world were worried about the economy. And, then we got Paris, and then we just started Paris in January, and it seemed like we were going to have, some real momentum this year. And now we have, this terrible, coronavirus crisis. And I don't think it's right to say that climate change is more important than coronavirus and taking, care of the health of people. I think it's rightfully so that we're doing what we're doing right now to protect people. But I think you can look at it as, coronavirus is the sprint and climate change is this marathon. The climate crisis rather is a marathon, and we need to take action in this decade. So, Greta is out there mobilizing youth, and she's right. I mean, we have to take action now, not just for my kids, but my grandchildren and so forth. So we're looking at an issue. So the scale of the issue is different in terms of time, and also the impacts. Unless you're being hit by a Category 5 hurricane like the Bahamas was last year, you don't see the impact right away. Or unless you're in Australia and you're having wildfires, or in California. So actually what's happened, too, is that we're seeing all these impacts as well from climate change today, unfortunately, and they're just going to get worse. So I don't think the issue is going to go away, even if coronavirus does. I think we're going to, continue as a civilization and put emphasis on it. But I think we just have to take this break now and deal with coronavirus, which is obviously we don't know how long that's going to play out, but we can also use it as an opportunity to reflect on, where we're headed as a civilization and where do we want to go as a civilization? What are our priorities? So I think a lot of people are using this time to reflect on things, and hopefully climate change is one of the things that they think about too. Not just think about it, but think about how to solve it. So,
yeah, certainly have a lot of time to reflect these days. I had a friend tell me a quote he heard that maybe humanity is the virus and the coronavirus is the planet's vaccination.
Yeah. So that global warming is the fever, and I've seen that.
Yeah, that certainly puts things in a different frame.
Sure. Well, I guess I hesitate to use that, even though I can see the logic there. I think, humanity has this, we have this propensity for great, great evil and great good. We can do all these wonderful things, and, we create and we can help people and we can lift our fellow human beings up. We just have to make an effort. And then there's the dark side, right? Like Star Wars always likes to talk about. So very tempting, and so we just have to sort it out ourselves. But I think what's different today compared to maybe what our grandparents lived in and experienced, or their grandparents, is that our ability to disrupt ecosystems. We've never had that capability that we have today. And that's what we're witnessing, is that all these ecosystems are being, disrupted by our own activities. And we have to kind of be shepherds and not, just takers. We have to regenerate these ecosystems, and we have to help them. And I mean, it's going to take an effort. If everyone does a little bit, we can get there, I think. And getting back to the whole one planet, since I'm excited about this and the opportunity. And one of the things I realized is that talking to the choir, preaching to the choir isn't going to get us there. We've got to expand the base. So, what I see in America, and what I even see in my own daily life, is that I'm a great professional environmentalist, but in my daily life, I'm a bit lazy. I'll be the first to admit it. I don't do all the things I could do. And, that made me coin the phrase, casual environmentalist. So I'm this casual environmentalist. It works for me. When I can do it, it's not too difficult, I'll do it. And I noticed that most people in America and all over the planet, we're all kind of casual environmentalists. We're happy to do it if we can, but it has to be made easy for us. And the other thing is that we're all under a lot of stress in our daily life. Like, time is really critical. So we have to make it easy and accessible. And that's kind of the catchphrases when we were thinking about when designing One Planet, is how to make it easy and accessible for people. And something that, if you can't change your lifestyle, I understand. I mean, I'd like you to analyze your lifestyle. We want you to analyze your lifestyle. And that's why we have all these different carbon calculators. But if you're not willing to make that change, okay, I'm not going to browbeat you into changing. What I'm going to say is that then support some projects that are going to make a difference. We're fighting as environmentalists this huge this huge marketing machine, called Madison Avenue, that just pumps out all this messaging about buying more, consuming more. And now during the COVID crisis, we all have, we can't spend stuff. I mean, online sales are going crazy because we need to get stuff, but by and large, we're suddenly, most of us are like, what do we spend things on? So maybe that's one of the outcomes of coronavirus that we're going to reflect on. Do we want to go to stores all the time and buy all this stuff we don't need? My guess is we're going to get a rebound. People are going to, we're locked up, we're going to go crazy and buy all kinds of stuff. But, maybe some of us will also sit there and say, well, I didn't really need all this stuff to begin with. I don't know, but what I do know is that the aspirations of most Americans is to live larger, not smaller. And so you have to give those people who, and it's not just in America, it's in China, it's India, everywhere, where you have poverty and where people, everyone aspires to a better life. And so what you have to do is create this mechanism for people as they're trying to have this better lifestyle and this bigger lifestyle. You have to give them access to alternatives that are going to give them, a more sustainable lifestyle so that they can buy those products and purchase those things. So you have to give them pathways to that, which is what we try to build into the app with our partners. And you have to give them, a way to, let's say, take easy climate action and manage their carbon footprint. So, another big idea is we're trying to mainstream carbon footprint management through our system.
Yeah. Well, I really have enjoyed this talk with you so far. And, thank you for coming on. Just for like a counterpoint, because I don't encounter it so much living in California, but I grew up in the Midwest, and there was certainly a lot of, shall we say, climate deniers, and through no fault of their own, there was a lot of oil production in western Kansas, where I went to school, and I came across resistance from some people, fierce resistance at times, and one of the things would be that it was kind of a form of tyranny to have these carbon markets, and it was like almost like a conspiratorial New World Order type of way to keep people down, or emerging economies from having a chance to utilize traditional energy sources to lift themselves up. And a lot of the times I would just have to walk away from the conversations, effectively, not getting anywhere. And, sometimes I would just not talk about it, just try to do the personal things that I could. But how would you have approach these types of people? Because I hopefully there's less and less as the data comes out.
I guess I've been close to that crowd, and even people in my own family, that view it as a conspiracy or as a hoax. I think less so. So my background, actually, I come from a family in agriculture. And my grandfather started beekeeping in Florida 70 years ago, and so I kind of grew up around that, and I've grown up, have other relatives in Montana, and I'm kind of the black sheep in the family at times, depending on who you talk to. But so I get it. I get what you're saying, and I worked in the oil industry too, and so it's hard. I think it was initially, again, like going back to when all this, when scientists were raising the red flags. I think it was moderate to say, okay, maybe we really don't have all the science and we don't understand what's happening. And there was a reason for that, because, when you talk about energy, it's fundamental to everything. And the energy industry is, hugely embedded in everything in society. So people are going to feel that, threat. Because when we do move to a low carbon society and economy, there's going to be winners and losers, right? I mean, the Teslas are hopefully going to win. What's going to happen with GM and Ford? Well, they better start changing. But oil companies, they tried to rebrand themselves to energy companies. They've tried to become a natural gas company. They've tried to move into renewable energy. And so they're depending on the company and the organization, they do different things. But still, fundamentally, they live on extractive industries. And then how to convince someone who's really a skeptic, or rather isn't open-minded. That's always hard. But I think you can try to put it in terms of insurance. I mean, if you know that there's a very high probability that we're going to have a storm, once every 10 years hitting your coast, and you own a house, maybe it's wise to pay for your, home insurance, and just in case. And we're doing that already. That mentality is there. The other one is that the other point I think is good to make is so basically what I'm saying is investing in clean energy. So what's the thing about it? I mean, isn't investing in an economy that pollutes less, that generates energy that is today now, fortunately, with all the advancements in solar panel production, I mean, you have a big change, because solar power per installed megawatt is actually cheaper than just about any other form of energy. And you don't have the operating costs, because you don't have to pay for fuel. So, solar power is becoming a no-brainer for a lot of communities. But storage is an issue in this thing. So the point is that, I hardly ever hear people saying, really, I want to have a future that looks like the Victoria in England, this industrial with smoke and all these things. No, people want a better environment, a cleaner future for their kids. It's just how to finance it that becomes the issue. And then again, I think you have to look at, the fact is we've always taken clean water and clean air for granted, and we're giving it away to these companies, to basically make a profit on. And so I think that's where the policy has to come in. You have to have rational policymakers. But, it's a little bit like talking to a coal miner. You can't really tell a coal miner that you're going to shut down their industry. I mean, it's part of their livelihood and culture. So at times you run into people that are going to be losers in this new economy, and I think you have to have a safety net there for them. The ones that can change, will. But I think by and large, we're all going to benefit, and it's not a global conspiracy. If it is, it's one of the worst run conspiracies. If you think about the success rate we're having, so. I would say that I had that image one time. I was at this event in Copenhagen, which was like in 2009, the big failure, and it was the circus, and there were just everybody was, all over the planet were there, felt like. And then I noticed that there was some, fringe news article that I saw on my phone, global elite, are negotiating, the world's economy in Copenhagen or something to this effect. And a secret society was going to do it. And I thought, gosh, if that's how people are looking at us, not only is it so wrong. I mean, like almost everyone and their uncle was here. I mean, we had indigenous people from all over the world, reporters everywhere, so this is far from a secret, meeting. But something's wrong with how we're communicating what we're trying to do, which kind of brings me back full circle to, again, like One Planet and advocacy. What I had this epiphany. Okay, so sorry I have to drag this interview out, but like one of the epiphanies I had was at one of these climate meetings. I thought to myself, I can't sit through this anymore. It's so dry. I mean, it's like watching paint on the wall, dry. It was just boring, gray, technocratic. And I thought, no wonder we can't engage people. And there was this little side event that was being run by, I think, artists, for climate change. And I popped in there and I sat down, and it was almost like going to church. I got re-energized because I realized there's some joy in this room, And so I think that's part of the problem with communicating climate, is that you wind up sucking out all of the positive and things that we can do, and you turn it into this browbeating people. And so what we try to do with Climate Futures and One Planet is we try to make it kind of a positive thing, like a joyful thing. I'm not trying to tell people how to live. I'm just saying you have a choice, and the choices we make are going to determine the outcome for, our future and your kids and their grandkids and things. So, here's some tools you can use to figure out which path you want to take. And yeah, let's try to bring some joy into this sort of, action and climate action. And, I think, the youth are out there screaming for climate justice and things, but they actually have a lot of fun when they do it. So that's part of it. You still have to make taking action fun and joyful.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of good to what you said there, and just overall, this has been a real joy talking to you. Hopefully, we can potentially reconnect for a follow up in the future, because I know we've gone over time here. But maybe just in closing, if you wouldn't mind telling us how someone could get involved at a personal level, or if there's anyone who's got a big company that wanted to get involved, what would the kind of like the onboarding look like?
Well, you just go to climatefutures.com. Either go through the contact us form if you're a company or a potential partner, or you go to the login registration for One Planet. I guess I should point out we're going to do some flash sales between now and when we officially launch, since we postponed everything due to the coronavirus pandemic. But we plan to give people VIP access that will be the early adopters. And, so that's all you got to do is go to the website.
Awesome. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today.
Thanks, Ethan. I really enjoyed it too, and look forward to coming back in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good rest of your day.
All right. See you soon.